There is no problem of racist speech on campus. There is no problem with racism. There is no problem with sexism. Or to the extent there is a problem, it is not very big. One of the reasons multiculturalism was able to get off the ground in the first place is that most college-age students, and especially those who are attending our top universities, are not bigots. There are very few who are. And so I think one of the really big problems we have to come to grips with is this sense in which the reason we have racial tensions in our society, the reason we have other kinds of tensions, is not because there is a problem with racism and other forms of oppression, but because people are looking for these things too much.
That was then 28-year-old Peter Thiel promoting his book at an event hosted by the Heritage Foundation in 1996. The book was titled The Diversity Myth, Multiculturalism, and the Politics of Intolerance at Stanford. Thiel co-authored the book with David Sacks, who's the focus of an extensive piece out this week in The Atlantic titled The Venture Capitalist Populist, How David Sacks and the New Tech Right Went Full MAGA and Captured Washington. And we'll talk in a minute about how that actually may not be good for MAGA in the long run. But with us now, again, the author of that piece, staff writer at The Atlantic, George Packer. Back by popular demand, George, the kids were crying out like voices in the wilderness. More Packer, more Packer. So here you are. I wanted to talk about three people, David Sacks, who you've profiled, Elon Musk, and Peter Thiel, all of them either from South Africa or spent formative years in South Africa. I know you don't piece them together that way, but I just think it's fascinating that three people, either from or people that spent formative time in South Africa, would have such a powerful impact. And also, all three, and we can go through it specifically, are harshly critical of Western democracy and do not think that liberal democracy is the preferred form of government. Talk about David Sacks and his views, and the others as far as you're comfortable talking about them.
Well, I've spent quite a bit of time with Thiel some years ago when I was writing about him, and you're absolutely right that Thiel has famously said freedom and democracy are incompatible, meaning for him to be able to live his life as he wants and make money as he wants is impossible under a liberal democracy where people who have the vote who don't believe in his libertarian views. Sacks is not very interested in political philosophy in my research. He is an entrepreneur and a venture capitalist, and he is mostly interested in making money. So he and Thiel go way back to Stanford. They were at the Stanford Review together, which was a conservative publication Thiel founded. They then were at PayPal, which Thiel co-founded with Musk, and where Sacks played an important part. They have a long history. And now what's really interesting, Joe, is how, having kept their distance on Washington, because they really didn't believe in any role for government in their industry, in technology, they now have kind of captured the Trump administration. And Sacks spent a year as Trump's AI and crypto advisor. And in that year, he essentially aligned government policy with the wishes of those industries and not with what I would consider more the public interest. And so in a way, they've now come around, having been hardcore libertarians all their lives, to a view that government can actually be useful to their financial interests, their business interests, and their sense that really the world should be ruled by a small number of very smart, very wealthy men, which is, I guess, another word for oligarchy.
Well, you know, they believe in capitalism when it comes to single mothers who they think should pull themselves up by their bootstraps. But when it comes to tech billionaires, they're all for socialism, all for the federal government giving them money and helping them out. Well, Sacks Sacks, hasn't he said, accused the United States of provoking Putin into war with Ukraine? And again, in other ways, again, sort of aligned himself with Putin, Orban, and sort of that anti-liberal democracy, right?
He has, and for a long time, I couldn't understand how someone who really does seem to care about facts and about logic and is a very good debater on his podcast could end up sympathetic to the Russian role in invading Ukraine and trying to destroy that country and absorb it into the Russian Empire. To be charitable, he's pretty ignorant about the history of that region and the politics of that region. But the way I came to see it was of a piece with his approach to business, which is essentially there's no moral calculation here. It's not about whether Ukraine has the right to sovereignty, whether we should support a democratic country under siege from an authoritarian empire. None of that seems to come into play. And so once you take away the moral analysis of that war, you end up thinking, well, Ukraine's a risky bet. As Trump once said, they don't seem to have the cards, although actually right now they do have some cards. And you end up sympathizing with Putin and Russia because morality has been replaced by a cold calculation of where your interests lie. And maybe if you're afraid of escalation toward World War III, well, that's going to be bad for your portfolio. And so let's tone this down and give Putin what he wants. That's my best analysis of how Sachs comes to the ridiculous position that he holds.
It is a ridiculous position, Claire McCaskill. But here you have, and of course, we haven't even talked about Elon Musk from South Africa, but yet another person whose formative years were influenced in South Africa, having a disproportionate influence on American government right now, these sort of billionaire tech overlords who see themselves as, sort of gods who are beyond reproach. And with Elon Musk, you have somebody who will tell you that was not a Nazi salute. It certainly looked like a Nazi salute to most of the free world. But he regularly calls Democratic allies tyrants. He promotes the most extreme far-right groups that have ties to fascism. He promotes conspiracy theories and hate speech on X. And again, just generally seems to be a skeptic of Western democracy, of liberal democracy, of the democracy that has been responsible for the American century. And I will say also responsible for the liberation of more people out of poverty than any other political system.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about these tech bros is that a lot of the people who have bent the knee to Donald Trump that were in positions of power in various institutions, law firms, universities, they did so out of fear. But I think George has hit on something here that I think we don't underline enough. These guys are bending the knee because of opportunity. They see a guy who can be moved easily with flattery and wealth and, coming in with a lot of bravado. And they've used those positions to get what they want out of Donald Trump. Now, the problem for him is politically what that does to the MAGA base, because when I saw those billionaires surrounding him at the inaugural, and when I look at the omelet line at Mar-a-Lago and who is surrounding Donald Trump there, and all the gold and all the gilt, at some point, the MAGA base, which does not look anything like Peter Thiel or Sachs or Musk, they begin to go, wait a minute, is this guy really for me? Because he doesn't even understand that gas prices are killing me. Talk about how this romance is hurting Donald Trump with his base.
And I think one evidence is just yesterday, the White House announced that after claiming that all the concerns about AI safety were just Biden era wokeness, they abolished his safety institute, AI Safety Institute. They're now backtracking and saying, well, actually, we are going to have AI models report their safety tests to the government. Why? Exactly as Senator McCaskill has said, because their base, their populist base, mostly working class, is afraid of AI. The numbers make that clear. And they don't see it quite the same way that David Sachs and Peter Thiel do. One more thing I wanted to say, Joe, you mentioned Western democracy. These guys use the phrase Western civilization as a kind of flag that they're waving when they criticize the European democracies. But what do they mean by it? That's the real puzzle, because if Donald Trump, who tried to overthrow an elected government, is the embodiment of Western civilization. It doesn't mean to them what it means to me and maybe to you.
Well, I mean, it's what's so bizarre. They talk about Western civilization as a code word. I don't know if there's some racial aspect to, quote, Western civilization. But the great irony is Western civilization is defined Churchill, 1940, Battle of Britain, U.S. troops scaling, the cliffs of Normandy to save Western civilization, to save Europe from Soviet tyranny. And now they reject, when they're talking about Western democracy, the freedom fighters in Ukraine and blame everybody but Vladimir Putin. It is truly bizarre. George Packer, thank you for coming back on Morning Joe. George Packer, the one-man show, will continue on Morning Joe indefinitely. But right now, you can read his new piece online. It'll be in this month's issue of the Atlantic magazine. George, thank you so much. We greatly appreciate it.